Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining in. So there's a very huge trend in modern spirituality here in the West called non-duality, Advaita Vedanta. It's also called the Satsang movement. If you see the word Satsang, normally that's going to be the main theme talked about. This teaching of Advaita Vedanta, our true nature, that we are the self, pure consciousness, the witness of all that is, and a very specific practice for how to realize this called self-inquiry or jnana yoga, Jnana. One of the huge inspirations for this movement is a teacher named Ramana Maharshi. Very fascinating being. At a very early age, he literally meditated for a few seconds, a minute, he didn't clarify how long, and had what's called a full awakening, where he recognized what he said was his true nature. From there, he was just a teenager, and he literally renounced worldly life and became in India what's known as a sadhu, where he literally had no possessions. He renounced his family, in a sense, all his obligations, even his name. And he would have actually starved to death if people hadn't fed him. He was in such a state of union, in Hinduism they call it samadhi, with God, that if people hadn't fed him, he would have just, over time, he would have died. He was in such a state of absorption, he wasn't even aware of the world or his body. So, one of his main teachings is this practice called jnana yoga, and this idea that we are consciousness itself. We are the witness of all our thoughts, all our feelings. And if you go to one of these gatherings based around this, that's what you'll hear over and over and over. You are that being pure consciousness. And there's different methods prescribed at different satsangs. Some of it is just come to satsang, listen to satsang. And some is a very specific practice called self-inquiry, inquiring, asking the question, who am I? The thing is that, in a sense, this is presented as Ramana Maharshi's fundamental teaching, when actually it isn't. Certainly it's what he spent the most time talking about. That would be accurate. But to say that self-inquiry and knowing oneself as the self is what Ramana Maharshi taught is actually completely inaccurate. The thing is, Ramana Maharshi didn't teach. People would come to him and ask questions. Sometimes he wouldn't even respond. He would just sit in silence. And sometimes he would respond. But he gave very different answers to different people. And in the end, while the answers all had the same goal of liberation from suffering, of freedom, he truly gave some very different answers to different people about what the spiritual path is and what practice they should follow. And the problem is, it's hard to study Ramana Maharshi because the majority of the books that are published out there are basically dialogues between Ramana Maharshi and one person. So he gave very individual instructions depending on who the person was. And that's where the satsang movement as a whole has gone completely wrong, and where a lot of people are actually being misled. So here's a quote from Ramana Maharshi. All the yogas, karma, jnana, bhakti, and raja, are just different paths to suit the different natures meaning the different natures of individuals, with different modes of evolution. Again, all the yogas, karma, jnana, bhakti, and raja, are just different paths to our different natures with different modes of evolution. So it's a classical idea in Hindu philosophy that the spiritual practice you undertake is completely dependent on your state of mind. And in fact, Ramana Maharshi said self-inquiry, this path of jnana yoga, is only for the most mature souls, only the most ripe, most mature individuals and most ripe souls. He said, if you practicing jnana yoga, or self-inquiry, without first having achieved one-pointedness of mind, meaning as you go throughout your day, your mind is focused on primarily, maybe not perfectly, but primarily focused on one thing. So he said, and this is, I believe, almost a direct quote, until one-pointedness of mind has been achieved, practicing self-inquiry is like trying to put out a fire with a wet noodle. You don't hear that at most satsangs. Mostly what you're told is, you are the self. Inquire. For whom is that question? So, yes, it's a fact. Ramana Maharshi spent most of his time talking about self-inquiry, jnana yoga, and our true nature as the self. And it's completely wrong and to say that that's right for everyone, or to say that he advised that for everyone. Absolutely not. When Paramahansa Yogananda straight up asked Ramana Maharshi, what's the most direct path for self-realization or God realization? Ramana Maharshi replied, it depends, and I'm having to paraphrase, I don't have the book, it depends upon the state of mind of the individual. So Paramahansa Yogananda took yoga and Indian philosophy to millions of people. So here was Ramana Maharshi's chance to like push self-inquiry, right? But that's not what he said. And that's actually never what he said, that self-inquiry is for everyone. He said the exact opposite. He said self-inquiry is for those who have lost all interest in worldly things. You don't hear that at Satsang. Again, self-inquiry is for those who have lost all interest in worldly things. So, why is all this so important? Because if you're following the wrong path, you're A, not going to make progress, and it can actually be injurious. Let me say that again. If you're following the wrong spiritual path, you're not going to make much progress, and it can be, not always, but it can actually be injurious. For example, if you're practicing the path of self-inquiry, and yet you are very interested in following your heart, having a partner, following your passions, you're going to be at war with yourself. Not your true self, not your absolute self, but one part of you is because self-inquiry is the process of releasing all desires. So you can't really pursue your desires and pursue self-inquiry. That's why Ramana said it's a path for people who have lost all interest in worldly things. It's a path of renouncing desires. Not renouncing desires being like, oh, I'm going to not do this anymore. But through the practice of self-inquiry, you lose interest in desires. So if you're simultaneously pursuing desires and thinking it's healthy to pursue desires and being like, yes, I want this, this, and this, I want to pursue this career, I feel like I have this mission, and you're simultaneously doing this practice which eradicates your sense of inspiration, your sense of drive and passion, you're at war with yourself, and you'll drive yourself crazy. I've seen it happen, and I've experienced it myself. So all this is really, really important, because non-duality in spiritual circles is becoming like a thing now. It's becoming a belief system. Oh, I'm just the self. Oh, self-inquiry. See, for example, Ramana said self-inquiry is the most rapid and direct, or something along those lines. I don't have the exact words, or straightforward means to self or God realization. So people are like, oh, it's the most direct route, so I should take that route. And even some teachers are putting that idea out there. Oh, it's the most direct route, so it's for everybody. That's utter and complete. It's worse than bullshit, because it's harming people. I'm one of them. It was very harmful for me. I didn't have one-pointedness of mind. I hadn't lost all interest in worldly desires. So I can tell you firsthand. So once again, these things that, even to quote Ramana Maharshi, is a little bit sketchy. Because as I said, most of the things he said were said between him and an individual. He was giving instruction to one person. So to back up to the first quote of his already, all the yogas, karma, jnana, bhakti, and raja, are all just different paths to suit different natures with different modes of evolution. So it's really important to know where you're at. And it's a classical Indian idea that self-analysis is really actually quite simple. It's based on these three qualities of the mind. And Ramana actually talks about this, called the three gunas: tamas, rajas, and sattva. Tamas means inertia or heaviness. These are very simplified definitions. Rajas means activity or desire, and sattva means peace or lucidity. If you have a lot of tamas in your mind, you have to do karma yoga. There's no other way. This is according to classical Indian philosophy. Self-inquiry will not purify tamas from your mind. Nor will it purify, if you have a lot of rajas, desire, it won't purify that either. It can purify a little bit rajas. Self-inquiry is for someone who's primarily sattvic. Again, peaceful, lucid, with very little desire. So, I will make another video on the gunas, because it's a whole topic in and of itself, and it's actually quite simple, and it's profound. It's profound how it clarifies what path to take. Amachi said it very well. She said, karma yoga, both the path of service, of doing seva, service, and bhakti yoga, of devotion to God, is safe for everyone. It's interesting she used the word safe, which implies that Raja Yoga, and actually Ramana said the same thing, Raja Yoga, which is primarily the yoga of working with Kundalini and the 7 chakras, that Raja Yoga and Jnana Yoga are not for everyone and actually have some dangers in them. So bhakti, the path of devotion, of loving God, of singing songs to God, is safe for everyone, as is karma yoga, the path of doing service, seva, and also of offering your actions to God. Jnana path of self-inquiry, and Raja, a very specific type of yoga, not the kind of yoga you experience at your average yoga class. Both have very severe pitfalls, especially if the person is not prepared and doesn't have expert guidance. So, I'll do more videos explaining about the 4 yogas and the gunas, and for now, we'll just start with that. According to Ramana Maharshi, your true nature is freedom. Another way to say it is, underneath it all, you're already free. And the question is, not what's the most rapid and direct method to realize that, but what's the most skillful and, in a sense, rapid and direct method for you, the individual you, the mind that is listening to this and processing this information. What's the most direct or skillful means for that to experience that freedom and know that peace? Thanks so much for joining in. Have a beautiful day. Aloha.